The Battlefield Killer. That is what everyone was dubbing Delta Force before it released at the back end of last year. I played it a fair bit during the beta and had a pretty good time, but since its official launch, I've not actually played the game until this week. In all honesty, I've been playing plenty of other games and the finals has really been scratching the FPS itch for me at the moment. With that being said though, I did still want to put some time into Delta Force, really because I enjoyed the beta first and foremost, but also to see if it really can overtake Battlefield as that large-scale FPS game that I really want to play. The short answer for me is no, and by the looks of the Battlefield Labs registration, it certainly hasn't dented the interest in the next Battlefield game either. But I know, I'm going to give both sides of the coin, and I'll talk about a few things I actually do enjoy with Delta Force, probably more so than Battlefield, but then explain why Battlefield is still going to reign supreme for me. First things first, Delta Force does weapon customization really well. Definitely to a more extensive degree than Battlefield has ever done up to this point. To be honest, I think that caters more to players from games like Call of Duty who are hopping over, who perhaps are used to more extensive customization, but coming from Battlefield like myself, I'm not too concerned about that and haven't really delved in too far. At least in regards to gunplay and overall game performance, it does feel good and certainly feels a lot better than 2042 when it first came out. Obviously the devs were able to look at the car crash that Battlefield 2042 was and hopefully learnt a couple of things maybe to make sure that at least the gunplay feels a bit more responsive and that your bullets are actually aiming where you're intending to. I think the real clincher for Delta Force though is just the barrier to entry. Obviously with it being a free-to-play title on PC, anyone can pick it up and give it a go, and also the performance and system requirements are significantly lower than the more recent Battlefield titles, and it definitely isn't as CPU intensive. As someone who normally plays their FPS games on low to medium graphics anyway, again it's not too much of a big deal for me, but if you're running on slightly lower end hardware, I can see why people would opt to play Delta Force instead, again because they can walk straight into the game without a monetary investment, and also because their systems will be able to play the game a lot better. Taking all that into account though, we've got to also look at Battlefield. At least from the games I've played in Delta Force, vehicles certainly don't seem to have as much of a commanding presence as they do in the Battlefield franchise, and they really feel like a bit of an afterthought and just put into the game because of the necessity to have some kind of mode of transport, even though the maps maybe aren't as well suited as Battlefield maps are for vehicle gameplay. Again though, as someone who isn't really a vehicle guy, it's not too much of a concern for me and I'm not too fussed, but I have had conversations with other players who've definitely said that Battlefield feels a lot more refined in terms of the controls and mechanics for vehicles than Delta Force at this stage. The main thing to remember though is Delta Force is still very early on, so things could definitely change over time here too. Something that I noticed more specifically, and again this is looking back at more historical Battlefield titles than 2042, is the definite lack of destruction in Delta Force. Again, destruction isn't the be-all and end-all, but if I'm playing a large-scale FPS game like Delta Force and Battlefield, I want there to be destruction in that. We've grown so accustomed to it in previous Battlefield titles. It was a travesty when 2042 didn't have much, and now Delta Force is headed down a similar pathway as well. Maps and gameplay-wise, the map design for Delta Force does feel fine. I don't have too many complaints, but equally, I don't think it's as good as some of the older Battlefield entries. Note, I said older Battlefields there, we're not going to count 2042 because those maps were particularly poor by the standards set by DICE in the previous games. The challenge that Delta Force has is coming onto the market at this stage as a brand new-ish IP that is trying to penetrate a fairly closed-off FPS market. Players know what games they like and they stick with them. Trying to get people to come and play a new game is very tough. It seems like they're going about it in a reasonable way and are trying to build up a community and just general support for the game. But there's obviously been a few missteps already in terms of the way they've handled a couple of different elements and just generally the way they've marketed the game. Of course, being a free-to-play game as well, the focus on microtransactions is blatantly apparent. There's also a few rolling and gacha style mechanics in the shop, which I'm not a massive fan of. Again, I don't mind them in other titles, and I appreciate why they're there. The developers need to make money to keep the game funded, but at the same time, if it's a bit too in my face, it again kind of puts me off really even committing to supporting the game if I even am incentivized to do that. For me, season passes are one thing, but when you're having things really pushed in your face, it kind of pushes me away instead. I think overall though, Delta Force is a solid title. Time will definitely tell whether it can maintain its footing or gain any ground on Battlefield or any of the other major FPS franchises. Like I said, it's definitely not the Battlefield killer that perhaps it was touted to be, but it could definitely take a foothold and continue to have a consistent player base going forwards. I think we all know it hinges on the success of the next Battlefield game, as to whether Delta Force is going to have an extended life cycle or could be dead in the water. I'll keep playing and I'm excited to see where it goes from here though. Let me know down in the comments below if you've been playing Delta Force 2 and what your thoughts are on it. If you like Delta Force content and you want to see more, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. As always, a massive thank you to my Patreon subscribers. You're over here keeping the lights on. I thank you all for your time and I'll catch you all in the next one.